Good afternoon and welcome to the show. I'm Jim Flyzik. During today's show, we will discuss how the explosion of big data is being addressed in government programs. With me today on the show are Todd Myers, the Senior Architect, NGA, and Chair to the Geospatial Integration Joint Leadership Venture Network. Annette Redmond, the Director of Information Management, U.S. Army G2. Frank Konieczny, the Chief Technology Officer at the U.S. Air Force. Mercedes Westcott, the VP of Public Sector at Cloudera. Danielle Forsyth, the CEO and co-founder of Thetus, and Kevin Shelly, a VP at Public Sector at MarkLogic. Let's get into the discussion here. Let's talk a little bit about some examples where we're making some progress using big data. Let's start with Todd Myers over NGA. Todd, give us some examples of where you see progress being made in using big data at NGA.
Sure, thank you. Good afternoon. So the intelligence community has been working around big data and collapsing infrastructures and so forth in the past 3 or 4 years. Sure. One of the major initiatives is the intelligence community ISITE, Information Technology Enterprise, where we're collapsing infrastructure, we're collapsing technologies, and we're actually improving mission by centralizing and focusing on how we design applications and how we do mission business process a little bit differently in a more shared environment for the community.
Terrific. Annette Redmond, how about over U.S. Army? What some of the areas where you see big data, we're making some progress at the Army?
So within Army Intelligence, we've been working with big data, obviously, throughout the last 12 years in support of this war. We also are working very closely with the intelligence community on ISITE and leveraging a lot of the capabilities the IC is bringing to bear. But internal to the Army, we are doing efforts with regards to biometrics, entity management, and processing and exploitation and dissemination of FMV sensors and other sensor databases that at the forward edge and both back here in the United States are very large data sets, and putting those advanced analytic techniques on top of it to bring value to the Army. Wow,
terrific. Yeah, it's just amazing, the explosion of data and the management of it and the kinds of things that we're going to be doing in the future. Mercedes Westcott, how's a company like Cloudera playing in this? How are you supporting your customers? You know, how are you positioning to play in the big data world?
Sure, Jim, and thank you. We see a pattern emerging amongst our information-driven public sector clients. They're making data the center of the agency and moving away from moving data to the applications to bringing the applications to the data. This enterprise data hub architecture is the next step in data management. It provides a single, secure, cost-efficient location for data consolidation, and it's designed to work within an agency's existing systems and skill sets. An example might be the medical research that's being conducted at the National Cancer Institutes. The Frederick National Laboratory has been using big data and pioneering ways to support researchers that are working on the relationship between genes and cancers. And they've built an infrastructure capable of cross-referencing the relationships between 17,000 genes and 5 major cancer subtypes across 20 million biomedical publication abstracts. The result's a better understanding of the pathways in which genes operate and the drugs target them.
Oh, terrific, terrific. I'm sure the amount of uses for this stuff is going to be left to the imagination as we pick up more and more data. Frank Konieczny over at Air Force. Frank, what's some of the areas where you see progress being made with utilizing big data?
Hi, Jim. We're talking more about information management philosophy, how we're going to manage all of the information. Because we have, obviously, ISR videos, we have network transaction flows that we keep monitoring. We have email. Email is considered a big data point as well as all the documentation that we have and all the file structures across all the Air Force. So as we look at it, we're looking at it from a more holistic viewpoint of information management and what can you do with it. For instance, we have airplane engine data, which is we want to get to a predictive environment where we can actually determine when engines are going to fail or when they need to be repaired. And so as we progress down the path of total information management, we're looking at all the information we have. And as Mercedes said, we are guarding the information more than we haven't been before. So like for ISITE and for JIE,
sure,
we are looking at a philosophy of we want to protect the information, wherever the information is.
Yeah, I like the idea of looking at all the data. I know back in the reinventing government days when I was associated with that, we actually looked agency by agency, and agencies were collecting enormous amounts of information, satellite imagery, satellite data, and the agencies were actually using like less than 5% of what they were collecting. Today, I think you got the opportunities. And a lot of that data was very important to other agencies. We just didn't have the way to manage it back then, but I think things are changing today. Danielle, Forsyth over at Thetus, tell us how you're positioned to play in this big data world and what the role you're playing there and how you're supporting your customers.
Thanks, Jim. A lot of things have changed over the last few years with big data. I think the big change over the last 5 years that we've seen is that big data was siloed in the various agencies, and now people are really realizing it's essential that information go across organization to the supporting organizations. For instance, the ground forces can't operate on their own. They really need all of the supporting organizations to be collaborating, and that's breaking down a lot of walls that have traditionally been there with big data, where you've got to allow collaboration with coalition forces and others. So what we're trying to do with big data is bring more relevant information to the right people at the right time. And that requires that all of us around the big data table start looking at things like information lineage and information connections and stop replicating information across the board. And so the combination of bringing information to multiple organizations that are working collaboratively and making sure that it's connected and not replicated is the area that we're focused on, so that people can do analysis, make decisions, and take actions.
Yeah, good, terrific. We'll re-explore some of that as we talk about some of the priorities and challenges. Kevin, Shelly over MarkLogic. How's MarkLogic playing in this big data world, and what is the role you're crafting out, and how do you see yourselves supporting your customer base?
Thanks, Jim. I would echo the sentiments of many of my colleagues that I think agencies are starting to take a much more holistic approach in harvesting 100% of their data as opposed to just a piece of it. Typically, it's been very easy to handle the structured data that fits very well into rows and columns, but in today's world, 80% of the data is unstructured. So you've got full motion video, you've got imagery, you've got social media. So MarkLogic as a platform enables you to ingest all of that data as is without any upfront data modeling. So your value of getting insight from your data is not only more comprehensive, but your time to value is also much quicker.
Sure.
So we're seeing this type of an approach across the intelligence communities to protect the homeland, in healthcare where we can derive better patient outcomes. And also we're seeing a lot of it, the data being harvested so we can pull together a common operating picture.
Yeah, terrific. So we can run those business analytics against the unstructured data sets as opposed to everything nice and neat and in columns and rows and so forth like we did in the past.
Right.
Let's talk about a specific program. Our listeners always like to hear, sometimes we talk big data and we're making progress, but people like to say, give me an example of where big data has done something really cool, a specific example. Annette, how about over at Army? Can you give me a specific program where you think big data is really making a difference?
Well, certainly, obviously, our objective is to enable the warfighter at the edge with the least risk to the largest number of soldiers that we can possibly have. So in one area, we have focused on the creation of a PED Processing, Exploitation, and Dissemination Center down at Fort Gordon, Georgia.
Okay.
What this allows us to do is no longer have to bring analysts into a combat zone, but we can do a lot of the analytical work on things like our ISR sensor data that we receive in back at Fort Gordon, Georgia, to enable global operations and to reduce that risk and ensure that we also have assured access to the intelligence community's larger data sets in order to enrich that data and feed it back out to the warfighters.
Yeah, terrific. I love it. Those kind of examples where you really focus on essentially lives. I mean, reducing risk to try to essentially make it safer for the warfighter. Frank Konieczny, how about from your perspective, a program you have that you think is really making a difference?
Well, the obvious program is cyber defense, because as we look at all the transactions that are coming in from the outside as well as internally and inside, we want to make sure that we understand what incidents are occurring and if we do a correlation of those incidents. Because you have to understand that we're a worldwide organization, so we get trillions of transactions coming in every minute. And so you have to do a correlation across all of the incidents that may occur and determine if that's really an incident or not, or just an abnormal data flow.
Yeah.
And this takes lots of work, lots of tool sets, lots of transaction flows that have to be analyzed we want to be able to do it in real time. That's one of the issues that we're going to have is as we actually increase our sensor flows, how we're actually going to do this in real time to determine if we have an incident occurring and a way to stop it.
Yeah. Living in a world where time decision-making is approaching zero. Todd Myers, how about a specific program at NGA that you think is making a difference?
Sure. So I'm going to outline a program, an activity that NGA is leading the forefront in the intelligence community at the Director of National Intelligence, which is part of the mission user group. And I'm trying to paint a picture that shows a good relationship that we've always had with the Army and Air Force in the context of the two things that were mentioned by
Love
the
that collaboration stuff.
So about a year ago, the mission user group under Kathy Johnson and Robert Cardillo, respectively co-chairs, established forums to bring together challenges to improve mission. NGA was chosen to be the chair representation for the entire community. We have members from CIA, NSA, NRO, DIA, and FBI, as well as other folks that are supporting what's couched as the Agile 12 to support this. The purpose of the GI job and the Geospatial Integration Joint Venture Leadership Network was to, per Kathy Johnson and Mr. Robert Cardillo's goals, we need to improve mission. And how do we improve mission? We need to follow the patterns that the warfighter is asking for, such that Andy mentioned. We need to make sure that the data is secure, and we need to have it in a cohesive manner that can be iterative by design and more of a business process. So we went through a series of hundreds of programs and activities and capabilities from different agencies. We nested it down to about 50 or so to tackle. Robert Cardillo was very specific on how he wanted to streamline the activities and be very specific. So our goal was to anything that had a visualization front end, the data had to go to the requisite place. So it either was going to go find a place inside of the Amazon hosting environment for the hosting environment for the intelligence community, or inside the GovCloud for NSA. And so we've set that path. We've outlined a 5-year plan.
Oh, good.
And we are in the process now of working that execution with partnerships from across the agency. We have a joint engineering team that's from each member from the agencies that are actually co-engineering this as we speak.
Wow.
And as such, DNI has designated NGA as the service provider of common concern for the geospatial platform inside of EyeSight. So we are the first to the table to actually instantiate a platform for shared common services for geospatial for the entire intelligence community.
Wow. Well, keep an eye on that one. We'll have to have you back each year, give us an update on where you are with that one. Danielle, how about over at Thetus? Could you give a specific example of a program you think's making a difference?
Sure, Jim. I'm not going to name the specific fusion center, but one of the areas that we're focused on around big data is in the regional fusion centers, where you've got a combination of people with not only different interests looking at big data, but different privileges in looking at big data. And you look at the difference between medical personnel in an emergency and law enforcement. What they can and should see is very, very different. And the information security issues become incredibly important, because you need to share information very quickly, but you need to share information in a way that people are not seeing inappropriate things. And the fusion environment just gets bigger and bigger and bigger as the regional response becomes more important, so that people can't slip through the system around one particular organization or another. 25 different agencies and organizations collaborating around information sharing.
Yeah, great. A fusion center, that's a great example. I mean, by definition, a fusion center is to be there to kind of like a big sponge, just soaking in data, and then finding out ways to push that data to the right people. Mercedes Westcott, what do you think about a specific program you'd point to that's making a difference?
Sure. And I, like Danielle, won't name a specific program, but we've seen GeoInt quickly adopt Hadoop and big data. Mm-hmm. So you have companies like Skybox Imaging, which was recently bought by Google, and Digital Globe making remarkable strides in this area. In the case of Skybox, they have a constellation of microsatellites that capture high-resolution images of the globe, and they store unlimited historical images for continuous temporal analysis.
Right.
And this is a tremendous amount of unstructured data. They're ingesting at the rate of about 1 terabyte of raw satellite data every day.
Wow.
So they store it in Hadoop at the core of an enterprise data hub architecture. And because of this, they never have to throw the data away. They can leave images in Hadoop for unlimited lengths of time in order to perform continuous analysis. So their clients can ask questions like, how good is this year's orange crop compared to 10 years ago? Or how many cars are in a given store's parking lot, and how does that compare to competitive retailers?
Oh, wow. Yeah, it's amazing. You know, and you mentioned a number of companies there. It's amazing the number of companies that have grown up over just the last few years. I mean, there's so many new, exciting, innovative, and creative companies that are jumping into the space with ideas to do. Danielle, you had a comment on that?
Yeah, I think it's been really interesting to watch the number of new companies that have sprouted up and the difference between sort of a 5-year-old strategy where people sort of said, we're the monolithic solution, and today's strategy where all of the people who want to be successful need to take a strategy that says we're going to play well with everyone. And it's quite a difference in
Right.
the organizations, and the standards that have been adopted, the cloud architectures that have been adopted, make it so if you are a vendor with proprietary capabilities, you're going to be locked out.
Yeah, you're exactly right. You know, in fact, I like working with companies that have like something like really, really cool things, something that's like that I can talk to my friends in government and say, hey, you ought to talk to this company. They got something really, really neat that you haven't seen, or it's completely different or creative or innovative. And it's a much easier conversation to have than, the same old stuff. Kevin, Shelly, what do you think? Can you point to a specific program you think that's making a big difference by taking advantage of big data?
Sure. So there's one that comes to mind, and it's actually in one of the armed services. So when you have budget cuts and cyber threats, people start asking a lot of questions, and one of the armed services wanted to try to determine and get a handle on all of their IT assets. So they really didn't have visibility into that. They went down that path for about a year with the relational technology and really didn't have much to show for it after a year. MarkLogic got brought in, and after 6 weeks, we had an initial operational capability accessing data from 23 of the systems, and at 4 months, we had access to all the data on their 53 systems. So what that was able for them to accomplish is, one, they were able to negotiate better contracts with their vendors, and two, they knew their IT assets, so they could compare that with known cyber threats and make adjustments.
Wow. Yeah. Great example of where something is relatively straightforward, but solves a lot of big problems and makes life a lot easier for a lot of other things that need to be done. We want to talk a little bit about lessons learned. Talk about all of you have been working these issues now for several years. We'll talk about some things you've learned going through the process. But before we do that, we're going to take a short break. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio 1500 AM. Welcome back to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio 1500 AM. I'm Jim Flyzik here with Todd Myers from NGA, Annette Redmond from the U.S. Army, Frank Konieczny from the U.S. Air Force, Mercedes Westcott from Cloudera, Danielle Forsyth from Thetus, and Kevin Shelly from MarkLogic. We're talking big data. When we went to the break, we had talked about some examples of where big data is being used. Let's talk about some lessons being learned. I mean, I would think as the explosion of data, there are a lot of things that need to change maybe to manage all this, and some lessons learned, things maybe you'd like to pass on to others listening to the radio show, maybe help them as they venture to do what you're trying to do. Let's start with Frank Konieczny. Frank, what are some of the lessons you're learning as you go through this process of managing big data?
One of the lessons is obviously we have lots and lots of data, and we have to figure out a way of managing it and figuring out how we're going to be able to search it and access it. So as we go down the path of looking at the data, we are going down a philosophy of tagging the data, not only for security classifications, but also the content of the data. And this is important, especially for our ISR data, because we are looking at a philosophy of we need to know if there's incidents in the data that it can be automatically recognized, because our personnel cannot go through all the data that's out there in real time, and even in afterward time, because there's not enough people.
Yeah.
So we're trying to figure out how to tag data, especially ISRs and other information, so we can see if there's an incident and then have the person look at it later.
Yeah.
And on top of that, we want to be able to do it in such a way that we have a dynamic attribute-based access control for the data. And that's not only for the ISR data, it's also for all the data that we have in the Air Force.
Yeah. Terrific. The old adage, people say, finding a needle in a haystack. What we've heard in one show is it's now finding a needle in a stack of needles in terms of there's so much information, and you need the tools that are that good to find it. Todd Myers, what do you think? What are some lessons you're learning along the way as things that catch you and you can say, wow,
So it's been very interesting over the past year to work with quite a few members from the agencies, as well as the other service providers, combat support agency customers that we provide our services for. So what I've observed in the past 3 or 4 years, actually, and we kind of use that as a something to temper the conversation, was that current business prior to cloud and prior to big data, prior to structured, semi-structured, unstructured data being all commingled, was very linear. You could follow a process, and the unknown knowns actually makes you rethink that. And so what I mean by that is one of the activities that NGA is partnering with, as well as with DIA and the other members of the community, is activity-based intelligence. You want to discover that data. You want to actually ask a question that you don't necessarily know what the answer might be. You want to be surprised by the answer. And so business processes that currently support very vertical systems or don't necessarily lend or bode very well as far as that is concerned. And so the platforms that we talk about are really these horizontal platforms that scale, that can react, can expand and contract based upon that. So there's an inherent existing cultural tradecraft that needs to be adjusted. There's the way we have our personnel that are trained, the way they're graded. Right. Current grading system right now is not based upon shared value. It's based upon, for example, how many reports an analyst generates. And so all these things blend into this, to these lessons learned on. So this is what we've done in the past. How are we going to address this in the future? How are we going to empower an analyst or an organization if they're sharing the same asset? That they,
it's like a whole new model in
Yep.
terms of how we're going to work this stuff. Annette, Redmond, how about the Army? What are some of the lessons learned, things you're learning as you go through this process of the change that comes along with all this massive amounts of data?
Certainly. So we keep talking about how data management is the key. Many of the colleagues here today have talked about that, and we in the Army agree with that. Certainly, we've learned that we can collect data and have access to numerous data sources. In our primary fusion tool, D6A, we have over 600 data sources available to us, and it's growing on a daily basis as the intelligence community makes their data sources more available. So how do you utilize that in order to take that needle that is in that stack of needles and ensure that the commander has the nugget he needs to execute an operation? So some of those efforts are coming to bear in leveraging the IC's ICITE capabilities and the 10 services that they are making available, and all of us in the community, in the Intel community, are leveraging those in order to create that environment to do just that. So in order for the data to mean something, it has to have value.
Sure.
And so you apply advanced analytic tools and data management techniques to allow both structured and unstructured data to come to bear in a way so that an analyst can bring all these pieces together and create the entire puzzle that you need to put together.
Yeah, Frank alluded to the same thing. You got to have all the data, and you got to find those nuggets that are meaningful to the mission and are actionable. Kevin, Shelly at MarkLogic, how about from your perspective? What are some of the lessons you see being learned as you go through this process?
So I would say the most important thing you need to do is think differently. Everyone at the table here has new technologies, and we've all got good proof points as to where the technology works. I think the adoption of these new big data technologies could be a lot quicker if people were maybe more adept to change. A lot of us, me included, we have these long-held beliefs in the way we've always done things.
Absolutely.
And if you don't let go of that, I think you're relegated to slowing your organization down and thinking small. So first and foremost, I would say we need to to learn how to think differently, look at the challenge from a different perspective, and go down the path that maybe we haven't tried before.
Yeah.
Furthermore, if you're going to do that, right, you might want to talk to some folks who have gone down that path before you so they can share best practices. And if you're using new technologies, certainly let's get knowledgeable about it for training. So my view would be more on the knowledge worker side.
Yeah, very good. In fact, hopefully we'll have some time to talk challenges and maybe drill down a little bit on some of those comments because they're very good. Mercedes, Westcott, what do you think? What are some lessons learned that you've at Cloudera as you've gone through this process?
We're still learning them, but we've seen, as agencies started creating big data initiatives, the focus initially was on enterprise data warehouses and large data repositories, and data warehouses by nature were silos and built for specific practices such as operational reporting. But on the whole, they restricted data use across multiple efforts. Security and SIM augmentation is a good example. So as agencies adjust their security postures, they have to store different types of data from more sources for longer periods of time. Traditional security tools struggle with long-term storage because they weren't built for it. Cloudera allows for a broader sample size against which to perform analysis, and this is where Hadoop can help tackle the cyber data collection problem facing the government. In the recent past, cybersecurity analysts had access to very robust tools, but could only look at structured data, which gave them a limited picture, but not the whole picture. With the introduction of Hadoop, the same analysts can look at both structured and unstructured data very quickly. They can incorporate social media trends and document repositories to broaden their view and their view of an advancing threat and become more proactive.
Yeah, we've been talking about that throughout the whole show, about how all these data feeds are coming in from so many different sources now in all kinds of formats. Danielle, Forsyth, what do you think? What are some lessons learned that you're experiencing as your company grows in this space?
I think there's a couple of things. We've been talking about big data, but a number of the agencies, particularly around Todd's mention of the eyesight efforts, have been focusing on what they call reference objects. The idea of not only having big data, but being able to tie it into models that push the pieces together. And this idea of having these knowledge objects that transcend any particular data store allow us to better share information across organizations. And so the codification of objects that are cross-organization is a key part of the DNI eyesight efforts. The second thing is that big data gives us an opportunity to encode signatures. So if you take a look at things like social media, there's always a lead-up pattern to social media. And one of the things that the military is trying to do is get kind of left of the incident and try and understand what's coming. And big data gives us an opportunity to very quickly put together lead-up patterns so that we can anticipate or even mitigate efforts that are underway. So I think two things, really, the idea of abstract representations and the idea of really quickly being able to model the whole thing so that you can see what the trend is and respond appropriately to it.
Yeah, so we can get proactive
Exactly,
out in front.
anticipatory.
Like Frank was mentioning with cybersecurity, try to get out there in front of it and see it before it actually is too late or the damage is done. Yeah, excellent point. Let's talk a little bit about priorities. I mean, what's important moving forward here for the next year? Let's start with Annette. Annette, what's on your front burner for big data for the upcoming year?
Well, certainly we've talked quite a bit about eyesight adoption, and it is a critical priority for Army Intelligence to start working with the IC's services that they've made available and bringing it to bear for the Army. A key effort in this, though, will require us to spend time prioritizing and conditioning our heritage data for ingestion into the cloud. And so that's an effort that's going to take significant time and energy to accomplish. And simple data management processes have to evolve beyond data tagging and authority-based access controls. We're going to have to create enterprise-level rule sets that enable us to do this in a holistic fashion and that work for all of us who participate both in DoD and the IC so that we don't have a seam between JIA GIE and eyesight as we move forward.
Yeah, excellent point. Excellent points. Todd Myers, what do you think? What's some of the priorities? What's on your front burner here and as you move forward with these
So the
programs?
output of the GI Javelin effort that has presented opportunity not only for NGA but for the entire community and the services is understanding how we take our value of geospatially enabled data to provide the GEOINT output and the value of that in a shared space of eyesight, and as well as partnerships with GIE. So the priorities for us is to understand how we leverage efficiently and how we scale and how we are ahead of the curve as far as being ready to pay for this monetarily as we go forward. I'll give you an example. What we've outlined in our roadmap is the platform, Geospatial Platform as a Service.
Okay.
It'll be always running, but that's a challenge. And so meaning if you build it, they will come. And we have no numbers to state what those would be. So I'll give an example of if the agencies all of a sudden had a mission requirement to have 10,000 concurrent users to consume some services, those services are going to have a price tag associated with them that we need to be prepared for. So our priorities is to make sure that the legacy licensing models from companies and even infrastructure providers adopt to a managed service construct so that we know ahead of time what we're stepping into so we can prepare for that.
Yeah.
So that's a financial responsibility that we're prioritizing. The other portion is to ensure that we're enhancing mission, not just taking the way we do business today and commingling the data and having everybody work with that to hopefully enhance mission, but to actually change the way we work with the data to not be so prescriptive on how we write applications that are tightly coupled to the data, as was mentioned before. So separating the applications from the data, presenting data layers so that applications can be written to an app's mall for eyesight. So those questions for the unknowns can be asked so that similarities in activity-based intelligence are derived from object-based production, which is part of an initiative to actually take the value of the attributes to an object and have that be shared across the entire community at a moment's notice, right? So two priorities, financial responsibility as well as enhancing the mission intelligence value gleaned from big data as well as the other types of data that we're going to be working with.
That's a great point, too, about the companies out there having to rethink their models of how they market to the government, movement towards the managed services approaches, and some of the old enterprise licensing things are no longer going to pertain. Frank Konieczny, what are some of the priorities? What's on your front burner for the upcoming year?
Obviously, it's increased mission effectiveness, and part of that is going to be better situational awareness across the board, as well as more better access control. And we're looking at it from, again, the holistic viewpoint of how you do this. We're getting more and more transactions, of course, especially at the network level, and we have to be able to tag even the transactions down to the application level, so we know what applications are being affected every time through that. And so we need rolled up that capability. But at the same time, we want to be able to control access to the data sources, because of the insider threat potential, that we can also then look at it from a viewpoint of holistically. I can see insider threats occurring, I can see logins occurring, I can see access to data that shouldn't be there. At the same time, I can see across if there's network transactions occurring at the same time that together would form a bigger incident that we don't see individually, but holistically we see it together. So as we increase our mission effectiveness across the board, we want to make sure that our situational awareness comes down to a more timely, dynamic view as opposed to let's look at the data later and figure out what happened.
Right. Yeah, excellent point. And I see as more and more of these big data programs take off, there are more and more companies that are targeting the kinds of examples you just had there. They're coming out with ways to identify insider threats, for example, or be able to, manage the machine information to look for all kinds of anomalies and so forth and so forth. Danielle, Forsyth, what do you think? What's on your front burner? What's high priorities at Thetus?
So Frank brought up several points around continuous evaluation, and I think that's a big change that we've had in the last year or so, that we used to sort of look at things on a periodic basis, and now it's really a question of the changing tactics, techniques, and procedures being evaluated in a real-time situation. And I think I think that's a huge change for all of us, and it does require, as several people have mentioned, a proactive notification so that you can anticipate these things instead of a reaction that's delayed by a number of processes. And that means you've got to have the technology, but you've also got to have the business practices in the government to be able to respond in real time.
Yeah, excellent point. Kevin, what do you think? What's priority for over at MarkLogic?
We've got a lot of things on our roadmap that are being driven by customers. I would say close to the top of it is semantics. We'll continue to enrich our semantics capability. Man has long strived for, making computers or software, intelligent, if you will.
Right.
And semantics goes towards that end in that it provides inferencing and reasoning. So, for example, John lives in London. London is in England. That's in the database.
Sure.
So with semantics, you could infer that John is in the UK, right? So it provides data to the analyst that he or she would have to conclude on their own. So it's basically providing the analyst with a better data set. As far as Todd's comments around object-based production, we are working on our solution around that, as it's very important for the intelligence community to be able to share attributes about an object in real time across the agencies.
Right. Well said, well said. And you can never go wrong by leading off by saying, we look at our customers' priorities. That one always works. Mercedes Westcott, what's priority for you at Cloudera?
Thanks, Jim. We see three overarching themes in public sector: improving data visibility and analysis, ensuring compliance and security, and maximizing infrastructure and human capital. Our focus is on priorities and projects that have demanding data access challenges, consolidation and fusion challenges, and archival challenges that can be solved by an enterprise data hub. Some examples might be fraud, waste, and abuse, business process and supply chain optimization, and cybersecurity data consolidation with social and unstructured data to combat advanced persistent threat.
Yeah, terrific. Well said. Well said. Good, crisp points there. And I like you bringing the human capital element in to the play too. I noticed there are, a lot of these advanced tools need people knowledgeable on how to take advantage of the advanced tools, so you need some depth and things like that. I want to talk about challenges, some of the hard stuff, but before we do that, we need to take a short break. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM. Welcome back to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM. I'm Jim Flyzik here with Todd Myers from MGA, Annette Redmond from U.S. Army, Frank Konieczny from U.S. Air Force, Mercedes Westcott from Cloudera, Danielle Forsyth from Thetus, and Kevin Shelly from MarkLogic. We're talking big data. We talked about priorities and programs and specifics. Now let's talk about the hard stuff, the things that are difficult, the challenges, the things that you need to overcome to try to get where you want to go. Let's kick it off, Todd. What's some of the hard things that are hard to get done to get where you want to go with these programs?
Well, so there's always the couch phrase of cultural resistance to change. So I like to use the term platform of change. There are continuous platforms that we have an opportunity to embrace to help guide this change that's required. So the challenge is showing the value to the people that need to use these environments and what it means to them. Versus taking their legacy environments and trying to force them to continue their legacy environments or their programs into this new environment. Not really a good way to approach that, and it's actually counterproductive for them.
Yeah.
So the challenge really is to outline the environment for them and make it very clear as to what the opportunities are for them and what it means to them, the value that they're going to glean from that.
Terrific. 110 shows. We are now 110 for 110 on the issue of challenges, someone bringing up culture and resistance to change. I'm serious. It comes up on every show we do that technology is not the big issue. It's change, culture, and doing things differently. Annette, how about from your perspective, what are some of the challenges, the constraints that you need to overcome to get where you want to go?
Well, certainly we're making progress on on data access and data management, but as we've mentioned earlier in this program, we also believe that the human capital factor is probably the biggest challenge we need to tackle. The Army, I know, we need data scientists that understand our mission, our functions, but also understand the underlying technologies and what's capable of being applied to our problem set. We know that we're going to have to get a lot of these data scientists added to our formation from our friends in industry, but we also need to create data scientists out of soldiers so that we have in-house expertise to apply to the problem.
Excellent, excellent. Frank Konieczny, what do you think? What are some of the challenges, some of the things that are difficult, you need to overcome, or I guess we should say there are no constraints, just challenges to overcome. What are some of those challenges you're trying to overcome?
Okay, one of them is how do you make the information that the user sees simple enough and aware enough so that they can respond to it accurately and correctly. Because right now we have lots and lots of data, and usually it's overwhelming for most of the people. So you talk about, culture change. Well, we have people change also. We have people rotating in and out all the time. And so the question is, how can I not spend all the money training people who then leave?
Right.
So how do you make this simple enough so everybody understands what's going on? And besides that, the other big challenge is how do I keep all the data that I have to do in a cost-effective manner? And we've looked at large data object storage as a capability that we've gone to commercial industry to support, because as we progress up and down for incidents that occur in the world, our response to gathering data depends upon those incidents. So if an incident occurs, we'll be gathering 2-3 times as much data as we normally gather. So where do you put it? It's a big one.
Right.
Can we have it elastic enough so that we can get to it? And how do we get rid of it after the incident is over? So between simplicity and awareness of all the information that's coming in, as well as how do you store it and keep it in a dynamic sense, is the two real challenges we have.
Yeah, terrific. Well said, well said. I'd like to shift gears a little bit and move us towards the future, talk about where this is all going, sort of, what's the world going to look like down the road here as I'd like to hear from all the panelists on sort of like take out your crystal ball and what do you see in terms of this big data explosion? What will it mean to government? What will it mean to our country down the road? Let's start with Kevin Shelly. Kevin, what's this all look like down the road? What's your vision for the future here? What impacts will we see in government in, say, the next 5 years or 10 years that can be attributed back to these days of big data?
There's the topic, the Internet of Things, right? I think it's going to become the Internet of Things. There's going to be sensors everywhere. We're going to be receiving data from people. I think I actually saw something where Google had produced, it was like a contact lens that would provide data about the moisture in the eye and things like that. So I think it's going to be the Internet of Things. We're going to be taking data from sources that we haven't even dreamed of at this point. And I think to a certain degree, we're going to find ourselves into virtual reality, right? Where it's not data that we're looking at, it's the whole environment that maybe a warfighter is looking at and going into, a hostile environment. So I think the data is going to be very rich, and I also believe that it's going to have some intelligence as semantics continues to improve, and not only will we get information from all that data, but the information will have context and reasoning. So we're going to be overwhelmed with it, and I think it's going to be a challenge to keep up with it.
Yeah, sounds exciting though. Smart data. Danielle, Forsyth, what do you see down the road? Where's this going? What's the future look like with this big data explosion?
So I think a couple of points have been made about both training people and being able to deliver a lot of information in a compelling way very quickly. And I think there's going to be a lot of changes around both story making and storytelling, so that you stop being in a mode of reading reports, articulating things in ways that are time-consuming to understand, and start communicating in ways that are very easy to communicate a lot of information very, very quickly. And as an enterprise analysis and modeling company, we have to move from delivering in the more traditional briefing mode to delivering the kind of compelling media that people expect through their internet experiences. And Frank's point about training people, we've got to get out of looking at very complex software systems as though we have to teach the user the complexity. We need to teach the user the simplicity by using things that they're already familiar with and delivering the information in a way they want to get it. And I think that, no more copying hard drives and sharing information as though you've got file systems. You really have to deliver very rich media around activity-based intelligence in a way that the information is instantly accessible and instantly relatable to the context that already exists. And I think knowing something's an anomaly is really, really critical for people to understand quickly.
Yeah, I think they're great points. I think you're right. I think the future is going to be visualization. The era of text data is ending, and visualization. And I think it was Einstein who said, if I can't visualize it, I can't understand it. So I think that's where we're going with the point you're making. Frank Konieczny, what do you think, Frank? What's it look like down the road to you?
Well, as I said before, we want to be able to visualize the information for sure in a simplistic way and awareness. Now, you may get farther than that. We may have some automated responses as well as to what can occur, how to relieve an incident automatically. But, of course, you have to have some man in the middle in some cases for some of those responses. But as the increase in drone traffic occurs, we want to be able to pinpoint information based on incident right away. So as all this information comes in, of course, we want situation awareness at a particular point in geography or in time, and be able to correlate that instantly. So, the normal way is we accumulate everything all at once, and then we kind of slice and dice it out. And the issue is we want to dice it immediately.
Right. I'll go back to Kevin's point about the smart data and actually Danielle's point about the visualization of the data so that it's usable right away. This is all kind of working together here. It's pretty cool. Mercedes Westcott, what's the future look like to you? What's it look like down the road in the years ahead based on all this stuff going on with big data?
Sure. Todd brought up the cultural resistance to change. I think we're going to see agencies change culturally and politically to rely on results from others via the visibility of data and processing, and achieve more efficient collaboration of thinking because of visibility. I also think that the upcoming depth, governance, and transparency of mission data will empower programs to accept just the deltas of change instead of the status quo of asking for full data sets. I also think we'll see true agility in which data to use, which analysis to perform, which processing to use based on the resources and the phase in the mission lifecycle. So in summary, I think we'll see collective shared data as a critical asset in decision making.
Yeah, that's a good point. I like your point about on that culture thing, that the data in these processes are going to actually be forcing change. I mean, as opposed to, I guess in the past we would say we have to change everything around in our organization based upon how we can implement computer stuff. Now it's going to be some of this data is going to be driving change. Annette Redmond, what's it look like for you, Annette, down the road at Army? Where do you see this all going? What's the end point look like a few years out?
Well, certainly our soldiers are already demanding ease of use in any of the applications that we're delivering to them. So we're seeing that today. We expect that trend to continue. They expect the kinds of easy tools that they can get at home on the internet to be applied in the workspace, yet still have access to these large data sets in a way that aren't large monolithic programs, but that feed them the data in a very tailored, seamless way that enables the kind of sensing that Mark was talking about.
Yeah, we talk quite a bit about the next generation of the workforce will have tremendously different expectations of the tools that will be used and how easy they will be used. I mean, the kids are used to, getting what they want, immediately, and it's going to be a different world for them as they enter the workforce down the road. Todd Myers, let's talk about the future as you see it. What's it look like down the road? Where's this all going? What's this all going to mean to us this 3, 4, 5, 10 years from now?
Yeah, so visualization is key. So NGA is setting the path to establish one of our forward-leading programs, Map of the World, to present for the entire community down to first responders across the board for authoritative geospatial data. That data is going to have the attributes, the value of the objects associated with it, place and time spatial reference to, and most importantly, provenance of, to ensure that when a soldier clicks on something, which I call right-click contextual resolution, that they get the pure value of all that data that was collected in that space, wherever they're looking for it. Another portion of this is that once we've done all that, that's driving towards the collective immersive visualization experience, the 3D experience that, as you mentioned, or as well as my daughter, it just comes natural to her. She's using an application, spinning. The other day she was spinning the Google Earth globe, and she was saying where all the countries were, and first of all, I was pretty impressed that she was navigating so efficiently, but more importantly, she knew all the countries' names as she was spinning around. So and she's 9, and so, in a couple of years, 10 years from now, that will be the workforce coming in expecting this type of experience as we go forward. So immersive visualization, foundation geospatial data for the entire community.
Wow, she got all those African countries right too? Boy,
She did.
I see the dates, and we see some of this stuff over there in like in Disney World. You go into Disney World now, you see the 3D stuff and all that stuff, and I imagine that's going to start working its way into our workspace. Let me try to do some summarization here. I took some notes, as I always do. I'll do my best to try to hit some highlights of what we heard here today. First of all, we were talking about examples. We talked about the fact that we're doing a lot of centralization of data. We're pulling a lot more data together into central, so we need ways to apply business analytics on that data to make sense. We heard about eyesight adoption from quite a few of the government folks here, about that being an example of something that needs to be done. We talked about data hub architectures that are changing the way that the architectures will exist. More data hub as opposed to some of the traditional big data marts kind of approaches. And I heard a lot about holistic approaches, looking at data holistically. On some of the specific things, we talked about the war fighter at the edge and getting the information to the edge so that they get the right information at the right time, and how that actually impacts the saving lives and safety. We talked about cyber defense being an example where big data can play a major role for us. We talked about collaboration across and fusion centers. About by their very nature, the fusion center is a big data repository and a way to collaborate and push data out. Some of the lessons learned, what data to mine and how to find the right data amongst this massive amounts of data becomes a real challenge, as well as scaling. We have lessons about scaling. I think it changes the ways we looked at traditional storage. We heard a lot about Hadoop and a lot about new ways, because we now need to store both structured and unstructured data. Priorities, eyesight came up again. We talked about need for new models. This is different. It is going to require some new models, both as well as on the industry side, as the way you market to government. Service level agreements will change. Procurement and acquisition clauses will change. More managed services kinds of approaches versus some of the traditional approaches. We heard about situational awareness being a high priority, and being able to use this data to create that situational awareness. And of course, visibility, analytics, compliance, and human capital were brought into the equation as all priorities that need to be addressed. Challenges, we kicked it right off with cultural resistance. Anytime you're changing something, you have people set in their ways. And we talked about the need to show value, and again, the need for human factors, to have the right people in place that can take advantage of this. The future, we talked about the Internet of Things. We talked about visualization being important, and to be able to take advantage of all this data, we're going to need to be able to visualize it in such a way that it's easy to use, and that the new generation workforce will come in and be able to follow in your footsteps. With that, I'd like to turn and first of all thank our panelists from taking days taking time out from your very, very busy schedule to share information with us. I feel like this is a big knowledge-sharing event. Thank you for keeping me smart. I love doing this show and listening to smart people talk about these issues because I feel like it makes us all smarter, sort of like none of us is as smart as all of us. We need to thank our sponsors, of course, who without which we would not have the show. So thanks for our sponsors. Thanks to the good people here at Federal News Radio and all they do to make this show be pleasant and come across without incident of any types. And of course, most importantly, thank you all to our listening audience that tune into the show and listen to us each month. You've been listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM.